Some killers don't wear masks. They don't stalk alleyways or wait in shadows. They live among us, quiet, ordinary, invisible, until it's far too late. And by the time you realize what they are, you're already gone. This story isn't just about murder. It's about control, psychology, and the terrifying truth that some people are capable of living two lives with perfect precision. 5 names, 5 cities, 5 patterns too late to stop. Tonight we follow a trail soaked not just in blood, but in silence. It begins in Northern California, a patchwork of quiet suburbs and redwood edges where families barbecue on weekends and retirees walk dogs down cul-de-sacs that loop like ribbons. In the early 2000s, Redding, California didn't make headlines. It wasn't known for much, but tucked inside one neighborhood, a gray single-story house with an overgrown lawn and drawn curtains, something was wrong. Residents called it the house that never opened. Packages piled up. The mailbox overflowed. The woman inside, if anyone still lived there, was a mystery. But what the neighbors didn't know was that the house had already become a crypt, and the man who owned it, Lawrence Finn, was far from a recluse. He was a predator. If you walked into Lawrence's garage in 2003, you wouldn't see horror at first glance. You'd see shelves of paint cans, a workbench, some old tools. But behind one false wall, a sheet of drywall sealed just enough to look real, there was a room. No windows, one chair, one drain. And beneath that drain, when investigators finally opened it, a crawl space filled with remains, bones, clothes, jewelry. Lawrence didn't kill with chaos. He killed with scheduling. He had a type, transient women in their late 30s to early 50s. Women on the edge, divorced, evicted, passed over. The kind no one reported missing for weeks. His tactic was chilling. He'd volunteer at shelters, offer work fixing up homes, and lure them in with trust. Once inside, there was no escape. The strange part wasn't how he killed. It was what he did after. Lawrence was methodical. He logged their names in a notebook, noted the date, drew a line, then never looked at the page again. His downfall came not from arrogance, but a simple plumbing call. A neighbor's backyard started to flood. The pipe was traced to Lawrence's line, and when city workers drilled into the drainage system, the smell hit first. By the time police arrived, they found evidence of at least 6 victims. Only 3 were ever identified. Lawrence never confessed, not even at trial. He simply stared forward, blinking slowly, as if the proceedings weren't real. In prison, he remained silent, never writing letters, never taking visitors, and dying of a stroke in 2011, alone. His house was bulldozed. The land was never resold. But the mystery stayed. Why did he stop after 6? Or did he? Long before the world discovered who Lawrence Finn really was, the signs were scattered like dust beneath a rug. Small, almost invisible, unless you knew what to look for. His co-workers at the city sanitation office remembered him as quiet, polite, even boring. He brought his lunch in Tupperware. He wore the same flannel jacket for 5 winters straight. He didn't drink, didn't date, didn't joke. But he always showed up on time, never late, never sick. The kind of man who'd disappear into a spreadsheet for hours and never make a ripple. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Because while Lawrence's surface life was neat, his private rituals were exacting. Inside his house, every cabinet was labeled, every drawer sealed with rubber strips to prevent dust. The television remote was wrapped in plastic. He logged every item he bought at the grocery store into a yellowing notebook with columns. Item, date, cost, shelf life. The man built his home like a bunker, and he built his kills the same way. Every woman who vanished was chosen for a reason, not random, not impulsive. Lawrence didn't stalk in alleys or follow from the shadows. He studied, waited, tracked routines, watched women who were fading, socially invisible, economically stranded, people who'd slipped through every safety net. One woman, Tanya Briggs, had lived in her car behind a laundromat for 3 months before Lawrence approached her with a cup of coffee and a job offer. Another, Denise Lott, had just come out of county detox, clutching a trash bag of belongings and crying on the sidewalk when Lawrence pulled up in his old beige Toyota and said, "You want a clean start?" These weren't abductions in the traditional sense. They were offerings, lifelines, and they worked. The garage room, later dubbed the holding bay by investigators, was a soundproofed nightmare. Lawrence had custom-poured foam into the walls, double-sealed the floor with concrete, and installed a filtered drain system that led out to an unused septic field beneath the yard. A single rusted chair was bolted to the floor. Zip ties left grooves in the arms. There was a light switch on the outside of the wall, covered by a painting of a landscape that didn't match anything else in the house. It took a full 2 days for forensic teams to even find the hidden latch. Once they did, the smell hit like a scream. No blood, no visible violence, just the stench of rot, the silence of things long buried. Beneath the drain panel, investigators found human teeth, 24, all from different women, some marked with tiny notches, possibly from pliers, possibly from nervous habits. But it was what they found in Lawrence's bedroom that disturbed them more. A binder labeled transit logs. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams of bus routes, shelter schedules, grocery store loading docks, and shelter curfews. He had mapped out every place a woman might be vulnerable. It wasn't lust, it wasn't rage, it was documentation, systemization, predation with a clipboard. What shocked everyone, from detectives to forensic psychologists, was how calm Lawrence was during the investigation. He didn't flee, didn't resist. When the police knocked on his door after the drainage complaint, he opened it, offered them tea, and sat on the couch while they searched the home. He even corrected one officer when they mispronounced a street name. It wasn't until they pried open the drywall that Lawrence simply stood up, turned off the kettle, and said, "I suppose this is the part where I get my coat." No emotion, no panic, just a man flipping a switch. At trial, the defense argued mental illness, claimed he suffered from dissociative sequencing disorder, a rare condition, almost entirely theoretical. The jury didn't buy it. Lawrence was sentenced to life without parole, but in prison, he didn't interact, didn't read, didn't watch television. He requested a Bible, which he never opened. His cell was always clean, his bedsheets folded with military precision. Guards called him the clock, because every hour he would stand, stretch, sit down, like a timer ticking toward nothing. His death in 2011 came without warning. No last words, no cellmate, just silence. But the real horror came afterward. A cold case unit reviewing missing persons across California noticed a spike in disappearances that matched Lawrence's travel history. Motel receipts, fuel logs, toll records, Fresno, Modesto, Vallejo, Bakersfield, all cities where Lawrence had submitted plumbing permits or sanitation filings. Women missing, some whose cases had been closed as runaways, some who were never reported at all. A rough estimate placed his victim count somewhere between 11 and 22, but it might be higher, much higher, because Lawrence didn't just kill, he erased. One victim, later identified by a partial match on a burned driver's license fragment, had no surviving family. Her name was Angela Mae Cruz. She'd been gone 3 years before anyone noticed, and even then, only because her dog had been turned into a shelter. Lawrence didn't take trophies. He took certainty. His house was leveled, but before demolition, the FBI used ground-penetrating radar to scan the entire foundation. 3 additional voids were found under the concrete slab, each about 6 feet long, each filled with rubble and hair. No names, no markers, just space. By the time the final report on Lawrence Finn was released, the media had moved on. The story barely made national news. There were no true crime documentaries, no Netflix specials, no podcasts, just a file, stamped closed, and a neighborhood that pretended none of it ever happened. But in Redding, California, The locals still whisper. They don't walk past that lot after dark. Kids dare each other to throw rocks across the foundation line. And once, in 2017, someone spray-painted the word "Remember" on the sidewalk in red paint. It stayed for 3 weeks, then vanished, much like the man who wrote it. You'd think a case like Lawrence Finn's would change the way people looked at their neighbors, that it would crack open the illusion of safety, force us to question the man who never misses a garbage day, who keeps his hedges too neat, whose lights go off at the same minute every night. But memory is short. Fear fades fast when it's not your street, not your family, not your name on the missing flyer. And while Northern California was still recovering from the silence Lawrence left behind, 1,800 miles away, in the flat, wind-swept streets of Wichita, Kansas, another man was keeping lists, but not of names, not of schedules. His logbooks were stranger. They were filled with numbers, calculations, taped together pages of hand-drawn blueprints and floor plans, angles, entry points, window heights, exit routes. But this man, unlike Lawrence, didn't vanish into his crimes. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the city to know someone was watching. And his name, though the world didn't learn it until much later, was Bradley Roach. Bradley worked as a freelance pest control contractor, the kind that dealt with infestations, roaches, raccoons, rats. People called him the Rat Guy. Drove a rusted pickup with a cartoon raccoon sticker on the tailgate. He was forgettable, pudgy, balding, always smelled faintly of ammonia and cigarettes. But for nearly a decade, from 2004 to 2013, every time a new homeowner in Wichita called for help with rodents or bugs, they were unknowingly handing Bradley a map of their home. He didn't charge much. That wasn't the point. The point was access. He'd walk through the house, spray corners, take notes, smile, and ask subtle questions. You live here alone? That door ever stick? Basement windows ever jam? All under the pretense of the job. All while making mental copies of every weakness. Then he'd leave. Wait. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months. And then one night, he'd come back. At first, the police didn't connect the dots. Wichita had a low, violent crime rate, and the murders weren't frequent, just disturbingly clean. Between 2005 and 2011, there were 6 known victims. All women, all single homeowners, all killed inside their homes without a single forced entry. The scenes were surgical. One blow to the head. No blood spray. No struggle. Each victim was placed on their bed, fully clothed, with a folded piece of paper on the chest, a triangle, taped shut, inside of which was a riddle. A riddle about time, about breath, about decay. The notes were strange, the grammar off, the references archaic. Police at first believed it was a bizarre cult, then a serial killer. But there were no signatures, no taunts, no DNA. Just silence and strange poetry left behind in ink faded by lemon juice and heat. It wasn't until victim number 7, an elementary school teacher named Karen Willis, that the killer made his first real mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was a message. Karen's body was found on January 17, 2012. But what disturbed investigators most was what was missing. Not valuables, not clothes, but her breaker panel. The entire metal fuse box from her basement had been removed, cleanly, wires capped, like a contractor had done it. At first, police were baffled. Why would a killer take a fuse box? What was the point? But when they looked closer, they noticed something else. Her HVAC vents had been pried open. Inside one of them, behind a slotted grate, was a tiny camera, disconnected, but old, covered in dust, and worse, it was wired through a narrow crawl space, leading to a portion of the basement that had recently been patched with concrete. When the concrete was broken, they found something unimaginable, a single black VHS tape, label L24-Willis. It contained footage of Karen brushing her teeth, watching TV, sleeping, hours of footage, dated, organized, from weeks before her death. There was no audio, just the static hum of surveillance and the horrifying realization that someone had been watching her from inside her own house, possibly for months. It was this VHS and its label that cracked the case. Police combed through missing person records, home inspection logs, and pest control reports, cross-referencing addresses with any names tied to L streets and date codes. After 6 months of investigation, a lead pointed to Bradley Roach. He had serviced Karen's home 7 months earlier. He had also serviced 3 of the other victims. He was arrested at a gas station just outside town, eating peanuts, listening to a police scanner. His van, when searched, contained floor plans for at least 30 homes, detailed, labeled, some with red X's, some with green dots, all in Wichita. When interrogated, Bradley didn't speak. For 3 days, he said nothing. On the 4th, he asked for a pencil and paper. What he wrote wasn't a confession, it was a quote from an 18th century book on time and entropy. All systems collapse when the observer becomes the event. When asked what that meant, he smiled. I was the rat in the wall. What they found at Bradley's home was worse. A shed behind the house, sealed with 3 padlocks. Inside, rows of VHS tapes, over 200, cataloged, labeled by street name and house number. Not all showed victims. Some were of families, alive and well. Some were children's rooms, all shot from within air vents, attics, crawl spaces. He had been watching the entire town. No one knew how long. One officer described it as surveillance as obsession, like he needed to see them to keep existing. No torture, no assault, just death, cold, clean, and framed like art. He was sentenced to 13 consecutive life terms, but he never reached prison. On March 11, 2014, Bradley hanged himself in his cell with his own shoelace, though guards insist his laces had been removed. To this day, the city of Wichita has an open hotline for residents who fear their homes may have been watched. Every year, a few more VHS tapes are uncovered in attics, behind insulation, even in plumbing vents, left like eggs, silent, waiting, because the question isn't how many people he killed, it's how many more he planned to. Bradley Roach's crimes weren't loud. There were no sirens echoing down midnight streets, no panicked chases across state lines. His violence was quiet, calculated, like a breath held too long beneath floorboards. But the deeper investigators dug, the more they realized they weren't just dealing with a killer. They were dealing with a man who had restructured his entire life around the idea of omnipresence. He wasn't satisfied with taking a life. He wanted to witness the unraveling. He wanted to become part of the architecture, the blinking light in your smoke alarm, the whisper behind the vent. It was surveillance as theology, and his theology had rules. Every victim's footage started the same way, a still frame of the room, empty. Then the door would open, the victim would enter. For days, sometimes weeks, he would record without sound, capturing mundane rituals, brushing teeth, adjusting pillows, folding laundry. Each tape ended the same way, a sudden black screen, no act of violence captured, just void. When the tapes were reviewed by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, they noticed something chilling. The camera angles weren't just positioned for spying, they were choreographed, framed. Literature Bradley understood light fall-off, lens warping, reflection control. He wasn't just recording, he was directing. The way a filmmaker composes a scene, choosing moments when the subject was most vulnerable, not physically, but emotionally. One agent described the footage as grief porn without the grief, a study in domestic fragility. It wasn't the death that excited him, it was the illusion of access, the power to watch someone live their most private, weakest moments, then decide when to end them. and his ability to access homes was nothing short of terrifying. In over a dozen cases, there were no signs of break-in, no tampered locks, no pried windows. Later, it was revealed that Bradley had ordered master keys online, some legally, some through the dark web. He'd also quietly built rapport with local locksmiths, even volunteering once at a weekend trade show where he asked detailed questions about lockpick-resistant deadbolts. His curiosity wasn't amateur, it was professional. Every home was a test, a blueprint, a simulation for control. But Bradley didn't live like a mastermind. His home was a wreck, cluttered with junk mail, stained furniture, half-eaten bags of chips. He had no visible friends, no relationships. Neighbors barely knew his name. He lived two lives: the insect exterminator with mustard on his shirt, and the architect of domestic doom. The back shed, where the tapes were kept, was soundproofed and temperature-controlled. Surveillance logs were stored in waterproof containers. Some were backed up on USB drives buried inside hollowed-out cans. There was even a binder labeled Events, where he had categorized what he called ideal entry conditions: stormy nights, trash pickup mornings, evenings after large sporting events. He knew when the city was most distracted, when people would sleep deepest, when alarms would be turned off. One document had a flowchart. Subject returns late from bar. Lights off, shoes removed at door, entry equals 4 minutes. No dog. It wasn't impulse, it was script. His victims weren't chosen for beauty or income or fame. They were chosen for timing, loneliness, architectural vulnerability, single locks, attics without cameras, basements with outside entry. Most were women who lived alone, worked double shifts, and came home exhausted. Some had filed complaints about strange noises. Some had mentioned flickering lights. None had connected the dots. One woman, years later, admitted she had felt watched, that the air in her home felt too still. But when she changed the locks and installed a camera, the feeling vanished. She never knew that her footage was found in Bradley's archive. She'd been watched for 17 days. He just hadn't acted yet. In court, prosecutors argued that Bradley was a surveillance-dependent psychopath. Defense attorneys tried to plead diminished capacity, that he'd suffered abuse as a child, that he'd grown up locked in closets, beaten, ignored. But the jury didn't need psychology. They had the tapes, they had the diagrams, they had the dates, and they had the knowing, the unbearable realization that someone this invisible had lived in their city for over a decade. One juror later told a reporter, "I don't fear monsters anymore. I fear insulation." Vents, silence. Bradley was sentenced to 13 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. But his end came quickly. On his 44th day in county holding, he was found dead, hanging, no suicide note, nothing but a piece of folded paper on his cot with a riddle scribbled in pencil. What breathes without lungs and watches without eyes? Below it, a single letter, R. Even after his death, the damage didn't stop. Police continued to uncover hidden cameras in homes Bradley had visited. Some were so well disguised they required infrared scanning to detect. One was found inside the eye socket of a ceramic owl on a fireplace mantel. Another inside a smoke detector, not the kind that chirps when the battery dies, but a full replica built from scratch. The FBI quietly formed a task force, not to find more victims, but to locate homes he'd surveilled. Some families moved out, some destroyed walls, some lived with the knowledge that they had been watched and simply chose not to know when or how. Bradley Roach became more than a killer. He became a presence, a rumor, a cold patch of air in a warm room. Even in death he lingered, not in spirit, but in circuitry, in every creak, every draft, every place you thought was yours and yours alone. In Wichita, they say his ghost doesn't haunt houses, his memory does. Every year, a few more residents tear out their ducts, seal their crawl spaces, double their locks, but nothing fixes the feeling. that ancient primal paranoia, that sense, buried somewhere in the back of the skull, that something unseen is watching, that maybe it always was. Because in Bradley's world, privacy wasn't a right. It was bait. You don't forget a man like Bradley Roach, not because of what he did, but because of what he proved. That the worst kind of killer doesn't need a weapon, doesn't need rage or even hatred, just time, just patience, just a floor plan and the knowledge that every house, every person, has a blind spot. But if Bradley was the watcher, the parasite hiding in walls, then the next name on this list was the opposite. She didn't wait. She didn't observe. She walked right in, smiled, and made you trust her. And by the time you felt the chill at the base of your neck, she was already gone. Her story never got the spotlight it deserved. Probably because the idea of a woman doing what she did, in the way she did it, doesn't fit the usual horror narrative. No blood-stained cabins, no love triangles, no postpartum defense, just clean, deliberate elimination. And it all began in Austin, Texas. They called her the Fixer, not in the Hollywood sense, not the shadowy problem solver for corrupt politicians, but because everywhere she went, problems disappeared, and for a while, no one noticed what those problems actually were. Her real name was Monica Vale, mid-30s, always dressed sharp, black pantsuits, discreet jewelry, hair pinned tight. Her job? A high-end, in-home caregiver for the wealthy elderly, the kind of clients who had house staff, medical needs, and no close family. Monica was hired by word of mouth, always stepping in when a primary caretaker quit unexpectedly or when a client needed someone discreet. And that's exactly what she was. Discreet, respectful, efficient, until she wasn't. The first death didn't raise any flags. A 78-year-old oil heiress named Caroline Pierce. Congestive heart failure. The death certificate said she passed in her sleep. Monica had been employed for 6 weeks at that point, having taken over care duties from a nurse who abruptly resigned citing personal reasons. No one dug deeper. The family held a quiet funeral. Monica moved on to her next client within 2 days. But over the next 4 years, a pattern emerged, quietly, like footsteps muffled by carpet. 13 elderly clients, all dead, all under Monica's care, all within 2 to 3 months of her arrival. The causes varied, strokes, embolisms, infections, but none were suspicious enough on their own. It wasn't until the daughter of one client, a retired attorney named Philip Kane, noticed something strange in her father's banking history that the first thread began to unravel. According to the records, 2 months before his death, Philip had transferred $8,000 to a private hospice service. But there was no hospice record, just a routing number that eventually traced back to a shell company, one created by Monica under a fake identity. That discovery opened a quiet but intense investigation. Private, unofficial. Kane's daughter didn't trust the police. She knew the system. Instead, she hired a forensic accountant and an ex-cop to look into Monica's past. What they found was staggering. Multiple names, multiple licenses. In every state she worked, Monica used a different variation of her name. Monica Velez, M. Vale, Monique V. Ellis. Enough of a pattern to be suspicious, but never enough to trigger an alert. She flew under every radar, until one name didn't hold. In Denver, a medical records manager noticed a discrepancy. 2 patient records with matching death details, same date, same symptoms, same cause, but different names. One was Monica's client. The other, a man who had died 3 years earlier in Louisiana. The autopsy summary had been copied. Verbatim. That's when the police were called. And that's when they realized Monica had forged multiple documents, faked hospice partnerships, and exploited a loophole in home care regulations that allowed private caregivers to operate without consistent federal background checks. The FBI opened a case under the title MV13, the assumed number of her victims. They were wrong. That number was too low. When they finally caught her, in a gated community in Santa Fe, posing as a nurse named Elaine Ward, she didn't resist. She opened the door, smiled, and said, "I wondered how long it would take." That phrase haunts the lead agent to this day. Because Monica didn't see herself as a murderer, she saw herself as a solution. During interrogation, she described her clients not as people, but as delays. She claimed she was easing suffering, preventing waste, giving the wealthy a dignified exit. When asked why she stole money from her clients, her answer was simple: dead people don't need bank accounts. But when they pressed her for details on how she did it, the actual method of killing, her demeanor shifted. Cold, guarded. She said, "Do you think a good magician reveals the trick?" Autopsies were reopened, fluids retested. In 3 cases, tiny amounts of a rare muscle relaxant were found in preserved tissues, a compound used in veterinary euthanasia, odorless, tasteless, and nearly undetectable in cremated remains. It became clear Monica had developed a method, a slow buildup of the drug over weeks. She never overdosed them. She weakened them until a small infection, a minor heart arrhythmia, could finish the job naturally. In a courtroom, that's near impossible to prove as homicide. But prosecutors didn't need forensic certainty. They had motive. They had the shell companies, the fake licenses, the travel logs. They had Monica's entire playbook, and it was written in death. She was convicted on 7 counts of fraud, 2 of identity theft, and 1 count of second-degree murder, the only one they could prove beyond a doubt. She was sentenced to 60 years without parole. But the true count of her victims? Some say 13, some say more. One FBI analyst believes it may be closer to 22, all wealthy, all old, all silenced before they ever knew who she really was. Monica never expressed remorse. In a rare interview from prison, she simply said, "People don't fear the needle when it comes with a smile." And that, perhaps, is her legacy. Not blood, not chaos, but the terrifying idea that kindness, true, believable, professional kindness, can kill you. Slowly, elegantly, without a trace. In Austin, her name is barely mentioned. Most families took quiet settlements and never spoke publicly. But those who knew, those who lost someone under her care, never stopped wondering, did their loved one die peacefully? Or did Monica decide it was time? Because when you look at her photo, still, blank, softly smiling, there's no hint of the storm underneath, no rage, no madness, just poise. And the memory of a woman who saw death not as a tragedy, but as a service. You expect killers to look like monsters, to act like them. You expect them to slip, to show a flash of violence, to stumble in their need for power or blood or control. But Monica Vale didn't stumble. She perfected silence, made murder look like mercy, made death a luxury service wrapped in linen sheets and cold bedside smiles. And just when law enforcement began to understand that evil could wear a nurse's badge, another shadow was forming. This time in the American Midwest. But unlike Monica, who walked in through the front door and left with a signature of trust, this next name didn't leave signatures at all. There were no files, no trail, no logic. Just gaps. Gaps in time, gaps in people, gaps in whole blocks of the city, where a man passed through and someone simply vanished. And he didn't operate in the usual killing fields of the coast or the crime-plagued arteries of major cities. He chose the overlooked, the flyover, the fringe, a place where missing persons weren't headlines. They were shrugged off as mistakes, runaways, dead ends. And that's how Detroit, Michigan, already fractured by poverty, bankruptcy, and years of vanishing infrastructure, became his hunting ground. He was never named in the traditional sense. The press couldn't settle on one. Some called him the Route 9 man, Others called him the ticket collector, but investigators knew him by the simplest phrase, the Greyhound Ghost. Because every disappearance started the same way, at a bus station. Between 2010 and 2018, at least 15 individuals, all traveling alone, all boarding night buses between midnight and 4 a.m., were reported missing within 48 hours of buying a one-way ticket that should have taken them out of Detroit. Most had no family in the area, no social media footprint. They were transient workers, hitchhikers, parolees, runaways, students, drifters, the kind of people who could disappear without shaking the system, and for years no one noticed the pattern. After all, it's not illegal to buy a bus ticket and vanish. Until the woman with the purple scarf came along. Her name was Janelle Breyer, 22, from Topeka, Kansas. She had come to Detroit to attend a technical college, and after 3 months decided to return home. She told her roommate she bought a Greyhound ticket for 2:15 a.m. and packed 2 bags. She texted her brother at 1:47 a.m. from the station saying, "Long line, kinda weird here, but all good." That was her last message. Janelle never arrived in Kansas, never used her debit card again. Her phone shut off by 2:30. For weeks, police assumed she had run off, maybe changed her mind, maybe met someone, until her suitcase was found. Not in Detroit, not on the bus, but in a storm drain outside Columbus, Ohio, nearly 200 miles off route. Inside were her clothes, her ID, and a folded paper bus ticket, smeared, partially destroyed by water, but still legible. The departure, Detroit. The destination, Topeka. What made it chilling was the boarding stub. It had been clipped as if punched by a conductor. The problem? Greyhound hadn't used ticket punchers in over 15 years. That one artifact cracked the illusion wide open. Investigators reopened other missing cases around the same time window and realized something uncanny. Nearly all had boarded late-night buses from the same terminal, Gate 6, Bay 3. A platform that had, according to one retired security guard, a dark corner the cameras never fully reached. One detective began cross-referencing bus manifests against recorded footage. What he found was shocking. In at least 9 cases, the individual missing was listed on the manifest, but there was no corresponding footage of them actually boarding the bus. Just footage of them walking to the gate and then fading into the corner. Never seen again. The FBI launched a formal task force in 2019, partnering with local transit security and bus line executives. They began conducting interviews with drivers, security staff, maintenance crews. That's when a former janitor, now retired in Arizona, came forward. He claimed that for nearly 3 years he saw the same man sitting in the station between 1 and 4 a.m., never buying a ticket, just reading, always wearing a brown duster coat, carrying a small black duffel bag. Never spoke, never caused a scene. But he was always there when someone went missing. "I thought he was a homeless guy," the janitor said, "but his boots were always clean." They pulled station logs, found nothing. No name, no records. But they did find one thing. In 3 different instances, security footage showed a man, matching that vague description, walking beside the victim. Not leading, not grabbing, just walking alongside as if they knew each other. In each case, the angle shifted, the shadow took them both, and only one person ever emerged again. Police nicknamed him the Collector, because every victim's luggage was eventually found, always dumped hundreds of miles away, always intact, always untouched. But the person? Never. No bones, no witnesses, no final texts, just gaps. One theory suggested he was an employee, someone with access to employee exits, back doors, maintenance corridors. Another theory proposed something more psychological, that he was a master manipulator. Someone who didn't take people by force, but by persuasion. A man who could convince you to take a quieter route, a shortcut, a private shuttle. The kind of offer you'd accept if you were tired, nervous, unsure, and someone spoke gently enough to make the world feel safe again. It was a nightmare scenario, not a killer with a weapon, but one with a voice. Despite multiple sketches, a federal alert, and psychological profiling, the Greyhound Ghost was never caught. He hasn't been seen since 2018. Some believe he died, others think he changed his hunting ground. But every now and then, once every couple of years, a bag shows up, found in a ditch, in a field, at the edge of a highway, always waterlogged, always zipped, and always with a clipped paper ticket. No fingerprints, no DNA, just a number punched through the corner, a number that doesn't match any current system. In Detroit, they've since remodeled the station, installed new cameras, rebuilt Gate 6 entirely, but if you ask the night staff, some will admit something strange still lingers. A corner of the platform that stays colder than the rest. A bench that no one ever sits on. A time of night, between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., when everything goes quiet and the motion sensors blink for no reason. And if you're unlucky enough to miss your bus and wait for the next, you might hear footsteps behind you. A low voice asking where you're headed. Don't answer, don't turn, just keep moving, because some killers leave trails of blood, and others, they leave nothing at all. To understand the terror left behind by the Greyhound Ghost, you have to accept something most people resist, that vanishing without a trace is not only possible, it can be orchestrated, controlled, rehearsed like a ritual. We grow up believing the world is full of witnesses, cameras, screens, records, that if someone tried to make you disappear, the data would catch them. But what if the person responsible already knew where the cameras turned, already knew what light would blind a lens, already knew how to guide you to a place outside the frame, like a magician working the edge of vision? That's what made the Greyhound Ghost so terrifying. He didn't break the system, he used it. But where his silence left gaps in our understanding, the next killer offered something even more disturbing. A confession, not written, not spoken, filmed, edited, uploaded, and ignored. Because nobody realized what it was, not until bodies were found and timestamps matched. And by then, the internet had already digested the horror and spat it out as curiosity, clickbait, infotainment. They called him Simon Glass. But online, he was known only by his handle, @Restoration Prince. He started simple, short videos on YouTube and Facebook Watch, early 2020, right as the world shut down. DIY restoration, the title said, old house fixes, basement mold repair. He filmed in a grainy, lo-fi style, single tripod, overhead lighting, no music. Just a man in work gloves sanding floors, peeling wallpaper, rewiring outlets. His face was never shown, his voice muffled behind a painter's mask. But what made him different what built his following, were the spaces he chose. Abandoned houses in Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, places long forgotten. He'd never say the address, but locals would recognize the bones. A rusted water tower nearby, a missing storefront, a row of dying trees, places left to rot, and each episode followed the same pattern: walk-through, inspection, minor repairs. A man trying to bring a dead home back to life. At first, people applauded him, thought he was a harmless eccentric reclaiming beauty from decay. His comment sections filled with admiration. People asked for tutorials, asked if they could help. He never responded, but the uploads kept coming. Twice a week, then 3, then daily. Until one video changed everything. It was titled, Restoration Log Number 42, Furnace room rewire. In it, the camera is positioned at floor level, aimed at a furnace covered in soot. The man enters frame, kneels, begins to remove charred insulation from wires. Nothing unusual until you freeze frame at 3 minutes, 17 seconds. For half a second, barely visible in the soot-covered glass of the furnace panel, a reflection, a hand, not his, smaller, palm pressed against the wall, a hand that doesn't move, a hand that shouldn't be there. Reddit caught it first. Users blew up the thread. Theories exploded. Was it a ghost? A visual glitch? Or something worse? A week later, a family searching for their missing cousin recognized the wallpaper in the video, not just the pattern, the damage, a water stain near the ceiling, a rip at the edge. They knew that wallpaper. It was in their grandmother's old house, a house abandoned since 2005, a house in which the cousin had last been seen. Police opened the property. In the furnace room, under the foundation slab, they found her body, wrapped in plastic, wrists bound, mouth taped, decomposed almost beyond recognition. The timestamps matched. Simon had filmed the video 3 weeks after her disappearance. She'd already been dead. The FBI stepped in, pulled metadata, tracked IPS, subpoenaed video hosts. What they discovered was beyond disturbing. Simon had uploaded over 90 videos, all from different properties, all supposedly abandoned. But when cross-referenced with missing persons reports, at least 14 matched cases where someone had vanished near that location. Some were confirmed, some weren't. And yet, in every case, viewers began finding small anomalies. A toe jutting from behind insulation, a breath on a dusty mirror, a shirt sleeve buried in drywall, and the most horrifying discovery, in video number 63, titled Sump Pump Drainage Upgrade, a voice can be heard. Not his, high-pitched, strained, whispering one word: please. Law enforcement scrambled to identify the man, but Simon Glass didn't exist on paper, no license, no lease, no registered business. The handle was connected to a proxy server in Connecticut, routed through a defunct VPN service. It was only when a fan, a teenage girl who obsessively tracked his location clues, noticed the same toolbox in every video, the same crack in the corner of his tape measure, that they triangulated a rough region. Upstate New York. They canvassed abandoned homes in a 50-mile radius. On the 19th search, they found him, not in a house, in a trailer, parked deep in a forest preserve, no plates, no power. But inside, it was a museum of horror. Cameras, lenses, laptops, hard drives, zip ties, tarps, blood-stained gloves, and trophies. Small, pathetic trophies, rings, ID cards, strands of hair braided into cloth, and worst of all, a list, a checklist, each name marked with a location and a task. Clean drain, repaint crawl space, install false panel. Each task matched a video. Simon was arrested. His real name was Jared Holden, a former HVAC technician who lost his license after a workplace injury. No violent record, no priors. Just a man who'd slipped through the cracks during COVID and found a new outlet for his rage. At trial, he admitted nothing, pleaded not guilty, claimed the videos were fake, staged, art projects. But the forensic evidence crushed him. DNA, fingerprints, timestamps, and the raw, unedited footage pulled from his hard drives. Footage that showed everything: the lures, the restraints, the final moments. He had documented each kill like a renovation, and to him, they were. Because Simon Glass wasn't restoring homes. He was scrubbing away people, repurposing spaces with silence. He was convicted on 17 counts of first-degree murder, life without parole, no chance of release. But his channel? It lived on, mirrored, archived, circulated like legend. Even now, clips still float through dark corners of the web. A hammer striking drywall, a faucet dripping over plastic, a voice, faint and choked, asking for light. Because Simon didn't just kill for control, he killed to be seen. And in some ways he got exactly what he wanted. It's easy to blame the internet, to point at platforms, at anonymity, at algorithms that reward attention over truth. But the truth is darker. Platforms don't create evil, they reveal it. They hand a mirror to men like Simon Glass and dare the world to look away. And the world usually does, until it's too late, until the video's been watched 1,000,000 times, until the body is cold, and even then, we scroll past horror like it's decoration. But some killers, they don't want screens. They don't want you watching. They want you to feel, to tremble, to know they are close, and that knowing won't save you. Our final story doesn't involve cameras or poison or silent bus rides. It's older, more physical, and it unfolds not in cities, but in back roads and woods, where screams can be swallowed by trees, and where police departments stretch thin across counties too broke to care. This one starts in West Virginia, coal country, in a town that doesn't show up on tourist maps, where one man built a reputation that would haunt the region long after his name was scratched from court records. And they called him the Bone Miller. His real name was Eli Cutter, and before he was a nightmare, he was a man with a job. He worked at a rendering plant outside Beckley, a place where roadkill, livestock waste, and expired meat went to die, and to be processed into bone meal and animal feed. The kind of place that stinks your clothes for days, the kind of place nobody visits unless they work there. But Eli liked it. He liked the order, the process, the weight of it. He'd always had a thing for bones. His co-workers joked about it at first, how he'd linger at the grinders, how he'd polish certain skulls, how he took home deer femurs to make wind chimes. But in rural towns, you don't ask questions if a man shows up every day and keeps his mouth shut. And for 5 years, no one did. The killings began in 2016, though no one recognized them as such at the time. A hitchhiker disappeared near Route 41. A runaway teen never made it past Beckley. A parolee stopped checking in. Different towns, different counties. No pattern. No panic. But what connected them all, what no one noticed, was their final known location, near Eli's delivery routes. He wasn't just a worker. He volunteered to drive the facility's scrap trucks to local farms, landfills, and feedlots. He knew every bend of the highway, every gravel shoulder where you could pull off unseen, and he always drove alone. The first break came by accident. In 2019, after a minor landslide near a remote ravine, a survey crew discovered a shallow burial site. Animal bones, mostly, cows, deer, but mixed among them under the soft rot of a pig carcass was a human jaw, clean, stripped, no teeth, no ID, just one sliver of a silver earring shaped like a lightning bolt. A missing persons search linked it to a 19-year-old girl from Kentucky named Lexi Ford, last seen 5 months prior hitchhiking north. Her family had assumed she crossed into Ohio. She never did. The discovery sparked a limited investigation, but budget constraints and jurisdictional overlap buried it fast. Until 6 months later, a second skull was found. Same ravine. Same cleanup crew, this one with 2 teeth intact. Dental records matched a man named Walter Boone, a transient with a record. Last arrest? Public urination outside a diner. Eli's truck route passed every Thursday. That was when the state police stepped in, quietly. They began reviewing GPS logs from the rendering plant, found that Eli's truck had passed through the ravine area 5 times in 4 years, always alone, always after midnight. They brought him in for questioning. He smiled, cooperative, said he pulled over there to nap, said he smoked joints by the creek, said he liked the quiet. No warrants, no evidence. They let him go. But they kept watching. The surveillance lasted 3 months. What they found was disturbing. Eli rarely socialized, lived in a trailer on the edge of a closed mining lot, kept to himself, bought bleach in bulk, had a workshop filled with blades, not hunting knives, surgical. But the moment that changed everything came from a drone, flown by an undercover wildlife agent over Eli's property. It captured something no one expected. A pit, 8 feet across, filled not with trash or junk, but bones. Bleached, sorted, some painted, some carved, arranged in patterns, mandalas, stars, concentric circles, a lattice of ribs wired into an arch. It looked ritualistic, artful, but when the images were shown to a forensic anthropologist, she said 6 words that opened the floodgates. Those femurs are not from deer. Eli was arrested the next morning. His trailer was torn apart. What they found inside made seasoned agents leave the room. Skulls on shelves, not displayed, stored, labeled. Red shirt, freckles, cried. Quiet boy, gas station. Jane Doe, truck stop, November. Not names, just impressions. Like diary entries carved in bone, a freezer held preserved tissue, hair sealed in plastic. DNA confirmed 9 victims. Eli refused to speak. Not at the station, not in court. He sat with a grin carved so deep into his face it looked burned there. One reporter described his expression as something that didn't come from this century. He was charged with 9 counts of murder, 4 counts of abuse of a corpse, and countless violations of human remains statutes. But before the trial could proceed, Eli was found dead in his holding cell. No cause, no wounds, just collapsed. Autopsy inconclusive. Guards claimed the lights flickered the night he died. Every camera went black for 22 seconds. When they came back on, Eli was slumped over, eyes open, mouth full of something. They cremated him, quietly, without ceremony, but the ravine kept giving. 2 years later, hikers found another skull, and then another. 22 victims by current count. Some believe it's higher. Locals still avoid that stretch of road, and late at night, if the wind shifts just right, they say you can hear clinking, bone wind chimes. That's how Eli Cutter wanted to be remembered. Not as a killer, as a craftsman, and in a place forgotten by time and starved of light, he almost got away with it. 5 names, 5 places, 5 different methods, and yet, when you step back, when you look past the headlines, the photos, the trial transcripts, and sealed evidence logs, you begin to see something worse than randomness. You see a pattern, not in who they killed or how, but in what they took. Lawrence Finn took invisibility, found women who the world had already stopped seeing and erased them completely. Bradley Roach took privacy, turned air vents and floorboards into confessionals, and made ordinary life feel like a trap. Monica Vale took trust, the soft, reflexive faith we place in caregivers and nurses and smiling professionals with steady hands and clean gloves. Simon Glass took attention, used the hunger for content to mask cruelty behind thumbnails and upload bars. And Eli Cutter? He took ritual, not just lives but meaning, arranging his horrors like sculptures to be remembered long after the victims were forgotten. These weren't just killers, they were thieves, architects of absence, and they didn't operate in the dark, they operated in plain sight. Inside houses, inside neighborhoods, on buses, on your screen, right where you thought safety lived. There's this idea we cling to, that killers give off a vibe, that you can feel it, that you'll know. But what happens when you don't? When they look like the guy next door with a quiet laugh and calloused hands? What happens when the man fixing your sink is mapping your home in his head? When the nurse watching your father's vitals is counting down the days until his pulse flatlines? What happens when the silence in your house isn't just silence, but surveillance? These 5 stories stretch from California to Kansas, Texas to West Virginia, but the emotional map is the same. People want to believe evil announces itself, that it's noisy, that it smells like smoke and sounds like screaming. But evil isn't theatrical. It's efficient. It waits. It smiles. It fits in. That's why it wins. And there's something else, something harder to admit. These killers didn't just exploit their victims. They exploited our systems, our rules, our blind faith in routine. Lawrence knew police wouldn't prioritize missing addicts or homeless women. Monica knew end-of-life care rarely triggers autopsies. Bradley understood how thin local precincts run, how easy it is to bypass a home security system if you've walked the floor plan before. Simon saw that people will watch anything, as long as it doesn't ask them to care. And Eli, he chose a place where even the coroner's office couldn't afford overtime. They played within the rules. They studied how we fail each other, how we abandon the inconvenient, the messy, the poor, the old, the scared, and used that gap as their invitation. Each of them, in their own way, made murder look like a glitch in the system, when really, they were the most predictable outcome of it. But maybe the most disturbing thread isn't in the killers. It's in us, in the way we process these stories. We binge them, we rank them, we debate the most brutal, the most twisted, as if horror is a game of statistics. We consume victims like characters, forget their names before the credits roll. Lawrence's women had no memorials. Monica's clients were quietly replaced by new hires. Bradley's survivors still live in the same houses, jump at the same creeks, but no one checks on them anymore. Simon's footage still circulates, reposted with reaction videos, monetized by strangers. And Eli's bones, some are still missing, still waiting in dirt while Halloween-themed podcasts guess how many he killed. This isn't just a failure of justice, it's a failure of memory, because to forget the victim is to reward the killer. And deep down, that's what many of them wanted. Not just power, not just blood, but permanence. The truth is, we like to think of killers as outliers, aberrations. But what if they're not? What if they're just reflections of cracks already present in how we isolate people, ignore warning signs, underfund mental health systems, cut corners in institutions meant to protect the vulnerable? What if killers don't slip through the cracks? What if they are the cracks? Living proof that if you build a society on disconnection, on silence, on performance over presence, something will grow in that soil. Something that learns, something that waits, and eventually, something that acts. It's tempting to end a story like this with hope, with a moral, with a reminder that evil always loses. But that wouldn't be true. The real ending is quieter, colder, like the breath before a scream that never comes. Because while you listened to this story, someone vanished. While you read the names, another killer learned how to hide better. While you looked for monsters under the bed, one slipped in through the front door and smiled politely at the camera. The scariest part of true crime isn't the bodies, it's how ordinary the killers are, how unremarkable, how unseen, until the damage is done. And so you're left with this: a front door that locks, a hallway that creaks, a package at your doorstep with no return address, a profile picture you don't remember adding, a familiar route home that suddenly feels different. None of it means anything, until it does. There's a part of your brain, ancient, silent, that still listens for danger when the world goes quiet. It's not the thinking part. It's not logic or reason. It's the hum behind your heartbeat, the flicker in your spine when a floorboard creaks behind you, the slight shift in air pressure when you're home alone and a door seems to breathe. That part of you has kept your ancestors alive for thousands of years, and tonight, it listened. As these 5 stories unfolded, as the names unraveled and the patterns emerged, something primal stirred. Because deep down, you don't need crime scene photos or audio tapes or bloody footprints to feel fear. You only need the idea that someone, somewhere, exists to undo you. And not in rage, not in madness, but in total calm. Because true fear doesn't live in screams. It lives in the moments before, in the normal, the expected, the quiet. That's where it waits. So what happens now? You turn off the screen. You walk to your front door. You check the locks, twice. You glance at the window, wondering if someone could see in. You listen harder. You tell yourself not to be paranoid. But something's changed. Not because you learned about murder, but because you learned how little separates you from it. How many of these victims were people just like you, working, resting, trusting? How many killers looked like people you pass every day? How many houses looked like yours? How many routines matched your own? That's the wound these stories leave. Not terror, but doubt. A hairline fracture in your certainty that you're safe. And that's the point, isn't it? Because killers like these don't need to be faster than you, or smarter, or stronger. They just need one thing: access to your home, your trust, your routine, and most importantly, your inattention. The moment you stop noticing, the moment you wave it off, the moment you silence the voice in your head that says, something's not right. That's when they enter. Not like intruders, like ideas. Quiet, logical, harmless at first, until suddenly you're inside the story and no one can hear you scream through the silence you helped build. You'll tell yourself these were rare, that 5 people don't speak for a country. But let's do the math. Over 20,000 homicides a year in the US, thousands unsolved, hundreds tied to serial patterns, only a fraction of which ever make the news. How many killers work quietly? How many wear gloves not because of blood, but because they never meant to get caught? How many are out there now, watching, refining, waiting for a weakness in the lock, in the law, in you? We'll never know. Because unlike the movies, real evil isn't theatrical. It's logistical, it's methodical, it rehearses, it prepares, and it doesn't stop when you press pause. It simply finds a new entrance. Maybe you'll remember this story, maybe you won't. Maybe it'll come back to you in a week, in a moment that feels wrong, like the way a stranger holds the door open too long, or how your neighbor smiles but never blinks. Maybe it'll echo when you hear a riddle on the radio that doesn't feel like a game, or when a bus pulls into a station at 2 a.m. and someone offers you a shortcut. Maybe it'll hum beneath your breath when the nurse takes just a little too long checking the vitals, or when the restoration video in your YouTube queue looks familiar, like a place you used to visit, like a hallway you can't place but somehow know. That's when you'll remember. And that memory, it won't save you. It'll only confirm what you already know in your bones but never say aloud, that monsters are real, and they don't hide in the dark. They hide in plain sight, in paperwork, in uniforms, in kindness, in quiet. And their only real power is that we never see them coming until it's far, far too late. So check your door, close the blinds, turn off the lights if that makes you feel safer. But understand this: locks stop thieves, alarms deter burglars, but nothing stops a man you've already let in. And in this country, with this silence, with this system, we've let them in too many times already. Sleep well.